Logic and Quantitative Reasoning Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Hamadi. I'm an associate professor in philosophy at Houston Baptist University and one of the designers of this course. Wherever you are, if you're driving, doing dishes or laundry, or unwinding after a long day at work, I hope you're having a great day. Since this is the first week, I wanted to cover what the podcast was designed to do. So if you think about a normal classroom experience, you're going to go in 3 times a week for an hour. You're going to sit there, and then what's going to happen is you're going to get a mixture of different things from the professor. Some of what you're going to get is pure content, stuff that you're going to need to write down in your notebook in order to make sure that you're prepared for the test or papers or quizzes or whatever are the assignments in that particular class. One thing that will happen that doesn't involve quizzes or tests or papers or presentations, anything that's for a grade, is you're going to get the perspective and the experience of the professor. That means you're going to get things like the flavor of what it's like to work with that particular discipline, some of the things that it can be used for, some of the puzzles that are left open. They're not the kinds of things that you would write down unless you were just interested in them, because they're not the types of things that will appear on a test or that you're going to be responsible for in some way to memorize. They're not the things that you would put on a note card. Instead, they're the kinds of things that change your feelings and attitude about the subject that you're studying, and also give it the flavor that would be missing from just the assignments. So what the podcast is designed to do is to give you that flavor, that experience. It's not the kind of thing that you would sit down and write out what I'm saying or take notes on it, or you'd be prepared to memorize the important points. This is those interjections, those little digressions that would naturally happen in a class, and instead they're going to happen this way as a podcast. So as you listen, whatever it is that you're doing, feel free to keep doing it. If you're like me, I tend to listen to my podcasts when I'm doing dishes, when I'm doing laundry, when I'm doing lawn work, basically when I'm doing anything other than sitting down with a pen and paper in my hand. And that's what I'm hoping you're doing right now as well. Driving, perhaps leaning back, playing the mobile game of your choice, and enjoying a little bit of rest and relaxation while we talk about logic, which we will do right after the break. Welcome back. One of the things that almost always comes up when we're talking about logic in a classroom is the way most people have heard of the term, and that is through the enduring legacy of the character Mr. Spock, or Lieutenant Commander, or Captain, or Admiral, depending on how late in the timeline you are. Mr. Spock, being half Vulcan, half human, is a person that is devoted to, as they call it in the show, pure logic, which means, as far as I can tell, something like no emotions at all. You can only experience life as a set of equations that then govern your experience. And then also, all your decisions have to be completely calculated, like you were playing a chess game of some sort. And nothing could be further from the truth as far as what logic is really like. It's not about denying your emotions or event as something that needs to be analyzed to death. And Mr. Spock has all sorts of terrible problems with romance and everything because he's like a machine. That's not what logic is about. Logic is the science of ordering thoughts, of being able to correctly move from one idea to the next, to be able to generate the right kinds of connections between ideas. It is a science. It's considered a formal science alongside math. And it's a formal science in that it's not based on studying the empirical world. When you're studying logic, you're not taking measurements of the Earth's crust or doing something in a test tube. Instead, what you're doing is you're studying the connections between ideas, but studying them in a repeatable and verifiable way. It acts as the tools, the basic building blocks for doing philosophy. In much the same way that modern psychology uses statistics in order to examine its evidence and to generate new research, philosophy uses logic. So at HBU, the logic classes are taught by philosophers. This is our primary tool for getting our job done. But it doesn't mean that it's only useful inside philosophy. It turns out that logic is extremely useful for all sorts of things. One is anytime you need to convince someone, you're going to be using logic. Now, you might be using it poorly, or you could use it well. And then in the process of convincing that someone, you have to take them from ideas that they already believe or they're at least open to, and then building on those ideas in order to generate new ideas that they haven't yet agreed to. And so in the process of convincing someone, you're using logic. And if you're like me, a lot of what I do has to do with convincing other people. Maybe I'm convincing my friends about the right movie to watch or a restaurant to go to. Maybe I'm trying to convince my coworkers that a particular line of action is the one that the organization should take. Maybe I'm trying to convince my boss of something about funding or organizational management. Convincing people is such an integral part of human experience that it would be inappropriate to leave something like that to chance. It's much better to be trained in it, to understand it, to know how it works, to also be able to tell when it's being used on you, especially if someone is using dirty tricks in order to convince you instead of clear evidence. So logic will help you be able to resist propaganda, to resist being sold on something that is wrong. So in that sense, it's extremely useful just for everyday life. It's useful anytime you have to make a decision. It's useful for specific disciplines like programming or law. Logic has so many uses, you will probably discover new uses of it after this class as you put these principles to work. Logic is also very fun. And I know this is going to sound a little crazy. It's like, yes, of course, the professor is telling me that the discipline that he's devoted his life to is really fun. Got it. Everyone says that. And I recognize that this is, I'm biased, of course. So while I grant that, there are plenty of people who use logic every day just for the enjoyment of it. And the most popular example of this is the game Sudoku. Sudoku is a logic game. People will sit for hours at a time, relaxing, doing logic. It's actually fun. It enables you to engage that part of your brain that solves puzzles, and you feel rewarded when you're able to solve a puzzle and get a result that makes sense. That part of your brain is stimulated very, very powerfully by logic, and so a lot of people just find themselves enjoying doing logic. The third reason, and this is one that is near and dear to my heart as a Christian, is that study, especially dealing with the mind and with ideas, is a kind of act of worship. Whenever you're connected to the world with gratitude and celebration, you're worshiping the Creator. So for logic, dealing with the mind, with thinking, with the way the world is structured, with the way ideas flow into each other, this is something that we can do while being grateful to the Creator that made it possible. And that gratitude and that celebration can be a worshipful activity. But suffice it to say that when Jesus explained that the 2 commandments were to love God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, and to love our neighbor as ourselves, this is something that logic can help us do. Loving God with our mind means more than just expressing truths about God, but can also mean applying what we've learned, applying our talents, in this case, applying the power of reason and rationality that God has given us. And then for loving our neighbor as ourselves, logic can give us the tools to bring clarity to situations we wouldn't otherwise be able to help other people see the truth of things and to be able to make the connections that they need to make. An additional way that logic goes hand in hand with faith, philosophers have long made the case that Christianity doesn't make any sense, that the doctrines of God couldn't possibly be true. And what apologists do is use those tools of logic to show that those criticisms are not well-founded. Apologists use the tools of logic to show that Christianity can meet those challenges, that it is not internally inconsistent. And the only way to be able to see that is examining those arguments that the atheists give. And the only way to do that is to use the tools of logical analysis. Let's finish the podcast today with some advice. So the first one, I really, really want to stress to you. You need to study logic every day. Every day. If you do, the class material will easily be embedded into your brain. Brains have plasticity. They change as they're being put to the test. If you're trying to think about something a new way, then your brain needs time to adapt to that. If you do something every day, your brain adapts faster. If you just study logic on Thursday before the quiz, and then take your quiz Friday and your test Saturday, and then you don't even think about it again until the next Thursday, your brain simply won't adapt to it. It won't be able to form the new pathways and new methods that it's going to take to be able to solve some of these problems. So my biggest piece of advice to you is every single day, even if it's just for 20 minutes, you need to study logic every day. The second thing is, take a look at the way this class is organized. There's a pattern to it. The pattern is you first introduce a topic, that usually comes through the textbook. It's explained, that's usually done with the video. You get to practice it, that's done with homework. And then you take a few short quiz evaluations followed by a test. So you have introduction, explanation, practice, and then evaluation. The most important part of all of these is the practice. So many of my students, as I've taught logic over the last decade, they will hear something introduced, they will listen to the explanation, and they'll think to themselves, I got it. This is fine. I know how to do this. Then they won't look at it again until it's time to take the test, and they're sitting there looking at the problem, and they remember getting it while they were in class. They remember that it seemed easy. But now when they have to actually do the problem in front of them, they don't know how to do it. The thing that seemed to make sense at the time, when they actually have to do it, no longer makes sense. Practice is the thing that bridges that gap. If you practice, you'll be able to do everything that you need to do for this class. I have never heard of a student for logic who did all of the practice homework, studied it every day, and did not make a very solid grade in the class. The people who do not make good grades in logic are the ones that blow off the assignments. They think to themselves, I understand it, and they just move on. So if you take a look at the amount of homework that's assigned, there's a lot of homework that's assigned. I'm not expecting you to do all the homework. I don't think anybody would be able to. It's too much. But you need to do enough homework to where it feels natural. I don't know when that threshold is. For some people, you do 5 or 6 of the homework problems, you skip towards the last couple questions in the problem set, and then when you try those out, they seem fine, and then you can just move on. You've got it. There's nothing else to do. However, for some of the material, you're going to have to practice. You'll be 2/3 of the way through that homework set before it finally starts to click. Now, everybody's different, and everybody reacts to the different material in a different way. So you might find yourself really slogging through the first module, but then modules 2 and 3, it just fits. You're like a Labrador that jumps in the water. You can swim. It's fine. If not, don't get frustrated with yourself. Some people are going to struggle with one section, find the other ones easy. Those people that find the first part easy might find the second and third parts difficult. So I assign the homework so that you can get enough practice to where it feels natural to you, where it just seems, as you look down at the question and the answer, it feels obvious. It feels obvious. Now that's my second piece of advice. Practice the homework until it feels natural. The third piece of advice is my students tell me that I have the most wonderful sleepy time voice. They'll record my lectures, put them on, and fall asleep. So I encourage you, if you find yourself tormented by the anxieties of the day and unable to let sleep overtake your troubled mind, put on my podcast, listen to my voice, and fall asleep. Thanks very much. I'll see you all next week. Until then, remember, read, practice. I'll see you all later.